Starting a new job in FM can be a daunting experience. There's a million things to do before you press continue for the first time, and it can be literal hours before you play your first game. As I embark on a new challenge with Ajax, I thought I'd share my approach to squad assessment, and how this informs tactical and transfer decisions later down the line. When assessing players, I'm generally looking at two things: how they will contribute in the attacking phase, and how they will contribute in the defensive phase. This is completely tactic agnostic. I don't want to go into this with a preconceived notion of how we will play, because then I start viewing players through a very narrow filter. There is a caveat though. I always want to be conscious of the club vision. If my performance is going to be judged on making the most of set pieces, for example, I want to know ahead of time that I need to prioritise aerial dominance. Now with Ajax, I think everyone can already guess what the club vision will be. Attacking football with priority on developing players from the academy. The supporters also want entertaining football, which in itself is a somewhat nebulous term. This isn't necessarily going to change our assessment, but we will pay attention to players' ages and maybe see if there are some in the youth team ready to make the step up. Before we start, I need to address the elephant in the room. I play without attribute numbers, and so whilst I can tell which range a player's attributes belong in, I cannot tell the difference between an 11 or 12, for example. Nonetheless, the principles still remain. I am looking for a general feel of how a player can contribute, and in that respect, the skin offers an advantage by grouping related attributes together. The attribute ranges are the same as those used in the vanilla skin, and I will keep a key at the bottom of the screen for you to follow along. In the interest of time, I will give an abridged summary of each player and will bring it all together at the end. If you want to look at the players in more detail, I recommend pausing the video. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the players. Martin Stekelenburg. A solid veteran, no real goalkeeping weaknesses, but poor first touch and technique means I wouldn't want him heavily involved in build-up. Remco Pasveer. No real discernible difference between him and Stekelenburg. Both seem capable in the twilight of their careers. Geronimo Rulli. The clear number one. Excellent reflexes and one-on-ones. Also comfortable on the ball and is a relative spring chicken at only 30 years old. Calvin Bassey. A solid all-round defender with standout physical attributes. His traits can be effective for beating the opposition press, but he has the turning circle of a luggage cart in a narrow corridor, and that's a recipe for disaster. Florian Grillitsch. Great positional flexibility. Naturally a midfielder but can fill in at centre-back. Another good all-rounder. And tries long passes can be good for initiating counterattacks. I do have concerns with his low determination. Jurrien Timber. Again, defensively solid and looks very capable in build-up play. Could play on the right of a back three, but undersized for playing centre-back in a back four. Might be more useful in the pivot, either as a defensive midfielder or inverted right-back. Edson Alvarez. The best of our defenders. Outstanding mental attributes, especially as an engaged defender, and comfortable on the ball. Only concern is the combination of aggression and his competitive streak. Owen Vandal. A good two-way player. Capable as a defender whose traits see him operate high and wide in possession. His tendency to wind up players means he'll slot into the pantheon of Ajax shithousery. As long as he stops short of cannibalism, he'll be fine. Divine Wrench. A possible understudy to Timber. His lack of aggression and aerial prowess means I'd be hesitant to play him in central defence, but he is comfortable in build-up and can play in either full-back position. Jorge Sanchez. Excellent quickness and a tendency to get forward makes him a good attacking full-back. That said, he has less than ideal dribbling and will be reliant on others setting him free. Kenneth Taylor. Despite being able to play in deeper positions, his tendency to move into the channels and his poor tackling means he's more likely to contribute in the attacking phase than the defensive one. Mohamed Kudus. The fans have demanded entertainment, and with a penchant for trickery, a tendency to run with the ball, and a desire to get in the box, Kudus provides it. For more advanced players, I look towards work rate and teamwork over defensive attributes for out-of-possession contributions, and Kudus is fine in that regard. Davy Klaassen. A veteran presence and mentality monster. Elite movement and attacking traits means he should be an effective runner from deep, whilst he is also an active, engaged defender. Steven Berghaus. He has the pace to be a threat in behind, the ability to shoot from distance, and the traits of a confused creative winger. A poor man's Iron Robin, if you will. Steven Bergwijn. A well-rounded attacker whose flair, agility and balance suggest he can operate in tight spaces. Is also the only right-footed winger in the senior squad. Francisco Conceição. The kind of exciting, enigmatic player that the fans will love. His lack of teamwork, however, makes him a liability out of possession. Dusan Tadić. I am a sucker for players with elite decision-making ability. He's the best passer, can play anywhere across the front line, has great mentals, and a desire for perfection. Just give him the ball and let him cook. Brian Brobby. Elite strength and balance means he's great for holding up the ball. Poor vision might inhibit his ability to link up with his teammates when it's time to pass though. He's also injury prone, so we might be unable to rely on his availability. Lorenzo Luca. A cult FM icon. A unicorn. At 6'7", he will definitely be a handful for opposition defenders. There is a temptation to just want to lump the ball forward to the big man, but we'll have to work out how this can fit in with the rest of the players at our disposal. I've also identified a few youth players who will be involved in pre-season and have the chance to earn a place for the campaign ahead. I don't expect these players to be well-rounded, and might only be able to effectively contribute in one phase. These players are Amitchan Kaplan, Yuri Rahir, Yuri Bass, Euro Hato, Kian Fitzjim, Christian Rasmussen, Gabriel Mizui, Christian Linson, and Stanis Edumbo Mazambo, with Kaplan and Edumbo Mazambo looking the most likely to get a chance. Assessing players individually is a good starting point, but we need to look at it holistically. Normally I do this in my head, but that doesn't make for a good video. So here is the squad, with my personal opinion of which positions the players can play, and there are a few things to point out. If we look at options at centre-back, we are very limited. A player who is only feasible in a back three, a player who is more comfortable as a midfielder, and 2 youth players. If we look at the pivot, it's some of the same players, alongside another 2 youth players. This needs to be a priority area in the transfer market, but if we assume that we're unable to reinforce in these positions, then we're probably forced into playing a 4-4-2 or 4-3-3. In a similar vein, if we look at players that are comfortable against the press, we can see that there is a lack of support from midfield here, and subsequently we'll have to rely on fullbacks to be involved in creating the 2-3 or 3-2 build-up shape. Looking at players who can play across the front 5, we have a good mix of goal threats, creative players, runners from deep, and dribbly boys. We should be able to put together combinations that will cause our opponents trouble. We may need to consider switching some of our wide players from their preferred position to the opposite flank to ensure we are able to stretch play by maintaining width. There's one last thing to consider. The following players have all been at the club for at least one season. For some, like Tadić, Alvarez, Timber and Kudus, we have to be prepared that big clubs might come calling, whilst others, most notably Berghaus, might not be key pieces of our plans and could be sold to generate funds for much needed defensive reinforcements. Of course, this is only the initial assessment. As we watch players in game, opinions might change. Players will develop over the course of the season, and so this is an ongoing process. Nonetheless, I feel I have a good understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of the squad, and finally, I can hit continue. At least in theory. Licensing restrictions means Ajax start the game with absolutely no staff, and so we'll need to address that, but that will be for the next video, as I take a look at building club culture through staffing hires, how storytelling can make your game more interesting, and the importance of disagreement.